hosted by the Home Builders Association of Greater Charlotte and put on by the Young Professionals Association. My name is Aaron Kersey, and I'm here with my co-host, Morgan Smith. And today, we have a good one. We've gone into land development and we've gone into entitlements and land acquisition. But today we start getting into site planning, and we have two amazing guests here with us, both from McAdams. And I'm going to introduce Rob Reddick first. He is a Virginia Tech alum and an engineer. And he's been with McAdams for 19 years now?
Yeah, it'll end up being 20 years, I think, in April.
Absolutely.
Been in Charlotte since 2006. Spent my whole career here in Charlotte with McAdams. Prior to that, when I finished up at Virginia Tech, I worked in Northern Virginia, the DC market, which was a good area to be in for what I do, for what McAdams does. I moved down here in 06 like everyone else, looking for a little bit cheaper, though I'm sure we're going to talk affordability later on. I started having kids, and here we are. Charlotte's been good to us.
Well, absolutely, Rob. And we thank you for bringing that on in. And Morgan, I'm going to let you introduce Ward.
Yeah, of course. Ward Marotti. He is working for EnviroTrac. EnviroTrac, it's newly named EnviroTrac. He is the director of natural resources, and he is also on the board of directors with the HBA with me and Aaron. So we're happy to have you here, Ward. If you want, I know that you just got appointed to a new fancy role. So if you want to explain more about that.
I'm one of our chapter's delegates to national. So I sit on the national board, National Home Builders Association board. But also last year I was appointed to the National Environmental Issues Committee. And this year, somehow, unbeknownst to me, I was appointed as the assistant vice chair to that board, which means that organization, if you're on the executive committee or the executive board of a committee, you advance in a linear fashion. So I guess that means I'm going to be chair of the Environmental Issues Committee nationally in 3 years.
So you might know a thing or two about, all this stuff.
We'll see. I guess that's what we're going to find out in a minute, aren't we?
I mean, that's what that means, right? I mean, that's impressive.
It also means that I'm the one that won't be quiet.
Yeah.
I think that's okay. That's my read on it. So
sometimes we need a little people to be loud and disrupt things. So
absolutely. And so, we're here with two experts and kind of pan to me here, who I have no idea what's going on. I'm just happy to learn here, fellas. So for someone in my spot and someone brand new to development, what exactly does site planning mean, and what does that entail, and why is it so important?
Sure, I'll jump in on that. So at its core, site planning is really just the layout of infrastructure, buildings, and utilities on a site. It's really that simple, right? You got a parcel of land, whatever shape that may be, and we're going to go ahead and try to lay in the buildings, the infrastructure, utilities, to sort of meet the vision, really to sort of meet the vision of the client, to be good stewards of the property, to sort of maximize the potential of that property. And there are countless other factors that go into laying out a good site plan. I know we're going to dive more into that as we go. But yeah, really site planning is just planning out what you can do with the dirt.
So we obviously talked about land acquisition in our first episode. So somebody goes out, a developer goes out, they're looking for land. They find this land and they're like, hey, this is the land that we want. It's in a good area. Like, it's a unicorn, as Bridget said last time. And so then you have the entitlement process, right? And then it's site planning. Like, how does it all fall into place there?
The due diligence comes before the entitlements, and the due diligence is the prior to purchase while there's an option. Once a client of ours finds a property that on the face of it looks appealing, they sign an option to purchase. They come to an agreement with regard to price with a number of caveats. And the due diligence part of that process is doing a preliminary evaluation of that site with regard to its potential developability as well as the constraints on it for a number of environmental issues and other things. And then once that due diligence process is completed, that's when the entitlements process begins, which is getting the rezoning, getting the permitting, doing all that stuff.
So they haven't technically bought the land
Correct.
yet. They're saying, hey, we want to buy it, but we got to do these testing first.
Yeah, we'll see it done different ways with some of the land act. Yeah, you had Chad on, and a lot of people, in his role, they may call us up and be like, here's 3 parcel numbers. We need a down and dirty, back of the napkin, rough estimate, how many lots you think generally with the code we could maybe get on here. I'm not going to hold you to it, but I'm going to hold you to it because I really need to know that so I can make an offer to the property owner. So you'll have that sort of site plan, if you will. From there, once they get a letter of intent and they sort of get traction with the property owner, yeah, Ward's exactly right. Then we start jumping into all the due diligence items from code to geotech, go out there and punch holes, to the environmental side that we'll speak to. And then from there, it gets more defined of a true site plan that Bridget and her team may, use from a rezoning standpoint.
Right. And so with everything going into it, doing your due diligence, being good stewards, how does a good site plan impact the long-term project profitability and the marketability?
Yeah, good question. Sort of look at that like 2 different folds, right? So when you think about a good site plan, we'll say good, meaning those items that you just said, marketable, profitable. I think of trying to create like place, right? Create an experience for that home buyer when they come to the neighborhood, right? So we wanted to obviously be affordable, to be smart with the dirt, to make sure we don't rack up infrastructure costs. But we also want to create a place aesthetically, frankly, that when people come home, they're like, yeah, this is where I live. There's that part of it. That's a good site plan. That also gets into a little bit of like branding of subdivisions,
right? Which
is taking the next step past actual site planning, right? Think, I don't know, the Del Webb products or Farmington, they have a brand sort of marketing that goes with their site plan. I also think there is then the profitability side, which what I would speak to is really just the design of the subdivision, right? So I know later we're going to talk with the Ward probably about wetlands and environmental. There'll be bottomless culverts, regular culverts. So we'll look at earthwork. A good site plan is going to factor in earthwork. How much dirt are we moving? How many walls are we, putting up? I have yet to meet a builder that said more walls, please, right? So it's always like, hey, can we balance the site? The dirt that's on the site stays on the site. Dirt doesn't need to come onto the site, right? So there's a lot of those things that a good design will do such that it makes it more profitable ultimately for the end user. I mean, everything we're going to talk about, I'll probably say this over and over again, everything in a new subdivision that we do is going to get rolled into the purchase price.
Yep. And, another part of what you're saying right there is a cost benefit analysis. It's what is it worth it for that extra culvert or that extra wall or that extra 100 feet of stream impact that has to have mitigation credits purchased because of it? What's the benefit of that? What's the financial return on that investment? And so it's not just a straight up there's more consideration for specific components that have cost benefit analyses associated with them.
Okay, so let's for some people, when they think about development going up, they don't realize that, let's get into the dirt. Like, there is going to be a lot of dirt that has to be moved. Like, you can't just build a house on top of dirt. So explain a little bit more in a clearer path of when developers come in about how much dirt is actually being moved and like how there has to be a certain amount or whatever to build on.
Yeah. So you asked like from
Depends.
a good, right. You're going to go out there and the client, the builder is going to hire a geotech and go out there and figure out how much topsoil we'll have, how deep we go to auger refusal. We'll then try to factor those things in on the design. Obviously, if we find a location where a rock is 8 feet below the surface and I'm showing 20 feet of cut, there's going to be questions that sort of come up. But just from a magnitude of dirt, like if you think about, it's about $3.50-ish per cubic yard. So 1 foot of cut on an acre, 1,600 cubic yards. So Someone do 1,600 times 35 or $3.50.
I am not
That's
a
that
math
number.
whiz.
But play it out sort of this way. So let's say you have a site. So we'll talk about like early on site planning to get a magnitude of dirt. So you got a site that is 75 acres, 100 acres. I'm really making up numbers here. And we're going to move 250,000 cubic yards of dirt. All right. And then on that's a good design. Another design could have 300,000 cubic yards. That's 50,000 times $3.50. So now you're talking almost $200,000 worth of dirt cost. Homeowner doesn't buy dirt. They buy a house. But that difference in cost that I just spoke to, 200,000 rough numbers, that's just getting rolled into the cost of the unit. So dirt really, really matters. And that's not even touching on if you got to haul dirt off site or bring in dirt.
That's assuming an on-site cut fill balance.
Right. And I think you guys, if you wanted to, not my podcast, but you could have a contractor on here and nerd out on dirt for a solid hour. Yeah. And y'all, seriously, there would be, it's really incredible that, we have some names that we could probably give y'all that do a really good job understanding dirt and making it work on the property. So,
I think that was just a great explanation, because a lot of people don't realize that you can't just, we've said it in podcasts before, and Aaron said it before, like, you can't just buy this piece of land and be like, I'm going to put a house on it.
Well, and another big component of it, and this comes back even to the original site selection, is the utility availability. And that speaks to some degree to the cut fill balance that you're talking about. Is a site going to have to be septic, or is it served by community wastewater? Same with, is it going to have a well on it, or is it served by community finished water? And those components, while not as big in volume, and probably I'll let you speak to the price component of it more, but those are some pretty basic initial analyses that need to be completed as well, especially if it's not going to have public infrastructure associated with it. You might have all kinds of acreage, but if 3/4 of it is not going to support septic fields, then it doesn't matter what the acreage is. It's the utility, the acreage that can be used and served by septic, that's going to determine what the number of lots that can be sold on it.
So what Ward is going down is what we would call like a constraints map. Yeah. So when we're pulling together a site plan for a client, like, hey, these are the parcel numbers, and we go ahead and do a constraints map. So you can get a lot of information online. You can get parcel lines and GIS topo, so you got a baseline. We usually then use GIS Online, Cabarrus County and Mecklenburg County. You may have a better recommendation for what are blue streams or perennial intermittent streams. We try to lay that onto the site plan. We look at the topo from the front to back. We look where the nearest utilities are. We research the code to see what our buffers and front setbacks are. Oh, you got this unicorn that Bridget might have mentioned. It's like, how come we got 50 acres here in Mecklenburg County? It's perfectly square. It's relatively flat.
It's in a good school district.
And how come it's not been built on? Well, it's all in floodplain. Right. So it's gorgeous, but it's going to be for deer,
or it's all sitting on bedrock, and it doesn't have any wastewater service.
That kind of just answers to, because, so many people talk about, it's happening in Denver right now too, with Denver, North Carolina, not Colorado. People get that confused. Sorry. But they see all this building going up, and then they see this like 10, 15 acres that it's in the middle of everything, but nothing's there. And everyone's like, well, why don't you just build houses or whatever on that? And it's like, well, that's why. Like, you may not know it, but
it can be why, but there's a lot of other factors that might be held by a trust, and the members of that trust are not agreeing on. There's a whole lot.
Not till grandma dies.
Right.
Yes.
Once grandma dies, we may be able to move in there, but otherwise we're going to own that dirt forever.
And so the physical characteristics of a site definitely have a bearing on the developability of a site, and the reasoning for why that patch that's a perfect square and sitting in a great location hasn't been developed. But there's lots of other factors that could be causal as well.
And so we were talking more about the environmental factors that go into site planning, right? We were talking about the utilities and the water that's being used and whatnot, but what trades do you guys go to work with, to go and find out what those pieces look like, and what does that cost for those reports?
Ooh, So typically, when we're doing our due diligence here, let's say we're working with pick a builder. I know them all, so I don't want them to feel like perfect. We weren't there. They're generally going to go about pulling the different contracts with the wards of the worlds or the geotechs of the worlds, the McAdams of the worlds. So we usually all end up generally working together, but not for each other, right? On that side. McAdams, we obviously will provide the survey side, obviously the site planning, zoning support, but then we would look to the client, hey, who are you going to use for, wetlands, who you're going to use for geotech. They give us a name and a contact, and then we usually reach out to get those reports. I'll let Ward speak to what he charges for his delineations and everything else.
Less than everyone else.
Yeah, good answer.
And it's a better product. Well, with regard to the due diligence work, it's typically, there are set prices with regard to unit acreage, but every site is different. And so I would say that one of the few due diligence services that we provide that has a relatively uniform pricing is the phase 1 environmental site assessment. And that's in the 3K zone usually. If it's above 100 or 150, then it'll bump up a little bit beyond that. But with regard to wetland delineation, cultural resources, protected species, those are really the other 3 big due diligence items that we do at the front end. Waters of the United States, wetlands, streams, cultural resources, is there an old graveyard there, and protected species. Are you going to fell a tree that's a bald eagle's nest or some other protected species impact? And those analyses, pricing of those, involve looking at the site and doing kind of a desktop analysis. So what does that site look like? If it's clear from Google Earth that site got clear cut last year, that cost pricing of that protected species evaluation is not going to be the same as something that's mature forest where there's known populations of protected species nearby. So it's very site specific, the pricing.
Right.
Ward, one thing that we've seen from like the plant species is like there's certain time of year, certain plants bloom.
Survey window.
Yeah. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because I know that's one thing I feel like can trip up builders or, even consultants, is if you miss that window, maybe there's.
Well, that's part of, with regard, we typically do standalone. We can consolidate the findings into a single document, but we typically do standalone documents. One of the reasons is that we can split out those different unknown factors and different risks. But speaking to the protected species timing and survey windows, we'll do an evaluation. There are a couple of data sets that we get, some data from the State Natural Heritage Program and then data from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to see what species are known from the area that are protected. And then we'll do, regardless of the time of year, an evaluation of the site to determine if there's potential habitat for that species there. If it's a plant species, Schweinitz sunflower is a big.
It's always the sunflower. Always the sunflower. I was waiting. I was like, I'm going to say it. I'm like, it's coming. The sunflower is coming.
That is often an issue in the Charlotte area, Schweinitz sunflower. The flowering period, when it's easily and definitively identifiable, is late summer until first hard frost. And so its habitat is recently disturbed areas, so like maintain rights of way, roadsides. But if you have a site that is essentially all mature forest, and the disturbance is going to be all within that mature forest, then you can essentially rule that out as part of your initial analysis. You go out there in February, right now you go out there. This is not the season that you can say definitively there is or is not a population of Schweinitz sunflower out there. But if it's all mature forest, then you can say there's no habitat for that. So that removes that species from consideration or potential risk. If, however, there are cleared areas and potential habitat, that's one of the results. You may have 4 other species and 3 of them are aquatics, and there's no aquatic habitat out there. X, Y, and Z, no potential for that, but there is potential for Schweinitz. And so if there's going to be disturbance or as importantly, I guess, from private sector perspective, the typical trigger for review of protected species is permitting for impacts to wetlands, because that requires the Corps of Engineers, who is the agency responsible for that permitting, to reach out to other federal agencies, including Fish and Wildlife Service, pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act. And so if there's not going to be any impacts, there may not be concern or requirement for an in-season Schweinet survey. But if there's going to be a permit necessary to be obtained from the Corps, that's likely to be required. And so that may push at least development of that portion of the parcel until in-season survey can be completed.
And it costs money too, obviously. So all that costs money. Right. And then say you do find something, like, I'm going to give an example. I went to North Lincoln High School in Denver, Lincoln area. And when they built the high school, they had to build a specific bridge to get to the baseball and softball fields because there was some like snail that was going extinct in this like riverbed that was
snail,
near.
Morgan.
Yeah.
Okay, you may not want to eat it, but it's a beautiful
I was going to say they're delicious.
But that's but they had to build, like, they had to leave this river and build this $1 million+ bridge to get over there because of that. And so there's major cost impacts to the project right there that people don't realize could happen.
Yeah, I mean, you're sort of going down the road of opening the door for like culverts or bottomless or bridges. We work with Ward and folks on the wetland permitting side. Obviously, they're in charge, leading it, but we're supporting that. And I feel like that's always one of the items that gets debated a decent amount. When we're doing a site plan, we're going to look at stream crossings. Frankly, if we can avoid a stream crossing and be good stewards of the environment and sort of still get the vision that we're going for, we're going to do that, right? I mean, there's no need to put in a stream crossing if we can keep the connectivity that people desire, if we can get our 2 entrances to the site where we don't need a second
not least of which is price. I mean, it costs more to have that than just a road with no culvert under it.
So if we start layering that all in, I mean, that's, we talked earlier about what would be a good site plan. That would be one where I was like, hey, do we really need this crossing? I mean, people I don't think realize when you look at like 100 acres, let's say it is a unicorn, it's that side of it, you don't have streams, you don't have, wetlands, you're still going to have 10 to 12 to 15% of the site could be stormwater regulations. You can squeeze that down single digits, but it's going to have walls generally. You're going to have another 10 to 12, 13% of just roads. And we're generally saying between 15 to 20% is going to be required for a tree save and open space. Combine them. You want to split them out. I don't care which way you do it, but that's generally what you're going to see. My mass fuzzy, that's about 40%. So you're already at 40% of the site is not going to be lots, homes. And that's assuming the topo's okay. There's not a couple creeks through the site. The rock, there's not, bedrock. The soils are generally okay. Septic, it's another whole, ball of wax, so we can go down. But, you start, when you're driving around looking at these site plans, there's a lot of nuance in there that it's just like, oh, there's so many homes on there. Like, well, actually, just to even meet the basic bare bones minimum, we're probably every bit of 40%. That's not. And that's just the nature of it. So, anyways, I think I started that talking about permitting.
Kind of moving on from the natural environmental factors and whatnot, I think people also need to realize that factors like walkability and flow traffic and safety all play a part. So what parts do those play going into site planning?
Yeah, no, good question. Sort of a loaded question because, everyone loves walkability, right? So the walkability of an infill site that you did is going to be different within the site and just with the amenities that are nearby, right? If you do an infill site here off Tremont, the amenities and walkability is south end. That's obviously different than the walkability you may get in a greenfield site that we're going to do in Gaston County. Obviously, we want to be, smart with that walkability, sidewalks, of course, thinking through trails. A huge pet peeve of the industry are trails that go nowhere. And so while obviously it can add cost to a site, I think designers as well as builders like doing trails, especially when it makes sense to where they're going. Mm-hmm. So that would be a huge part of the walkability part. The interesting is like connectivity. So I actually live here in South Park. Traffic in South Park. But the reality of it is when I go from South End to my house, there's about 6 different ways I can go. So as bad as attractive it is, there's a connectivity that works. You get further out, greenfield sites, people like their cul-de-sacs. Everyone loves a cul-de-sac. I live on a cul-de-sac. But that connectivity to adjacent properties and adjacent neighborhoods already, it's amazing how much that can get people worked up. I mean, I'm sure Bridget could tell stories about, connecting to an existing neighborhood that's been there 3 years and has a stub to their property line. And now we're developing the property next door. And, Mr. John Doe stands up and says, well, I walked my dogs over there on that property, and we were told by a realtor they were never going to be, connect to this road. The reality of it is almost when you give people connectivity, they don't even realize they like it till they like it, but they are going to fight it the whole time. That makes sense. Like, it's like, you don't really know what's good for you, but trust me, you're really going to like it when you do that connectivity. But that's also goes a little bit against why people maybe move further out. So we're always trying to find that balance of this is what the ordinance says. This is what we know is better long-term, right? So not everyone has to be on 74 or 16 or 77. Like I avoid the highway all the time. So anyways, it's a good question.
And another component of that I would chime in on is the additional costs that are added to projects because of NCDOT requirements for new developments and access turn lanes. I mean, I'll let our engineer speak to that more than but I see that as the Bugs and Bunnies guy sitting at that rezoning meeting to talk about the streams and stuff I do. I hear about that more than what I'm there to speak to. And so,
yeah, those are, even more costs that just go into it. I think that the development community wants to be part of the solution. Obviously, I'm the engineer, not on the development side. It's not my money, but we want to be fair and pay for what is fair. And we fall all too often, builders. I'm sure Bridget spoke to this. I look forward to seeing the podcast with her and Rob on there. It's like, we're not the solution. Hey, you got a paycheck. Why don't you pony it up and help solve the problem that they created that now are looking for us to solve? So we're always trying to balance between what is fair and what, we should be helping provide from a solution standpoint. But yeah, you said traffic. How many times you hear schools? Schools. And it's okay. People want to move to North Carolina, people. Right. We got to find a way to solve this. Right. It's, people need a place to live. We are creating jobs. Thanks to the Lord, we are creating jobs in North Carolina that people are coming here. It's not Ward's job to figure out all the schools. We got to work together and try to figure that out. But
right. And you guys were talking about the associated costs that are, coming with these ordinances and these regulations. But to the public, what do you think the most surprising costs that comes with, that could directly impact somebody's home affordability or the profitability? What do you think the most surprising cost is?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I don't have a clear answer, but I feel like folks don't really have a well-rounded sense of what we've touched on this whole time of what really all the costs are associated with bringing a site from being forested acreage or a farm field to their neighborhood. They're not aware of that. So to me, I guess the answer has as much to do with perception and exposure to the different cost components as what truly costs the most.
Yeah. That's a hard one to answer. Maybe after purchase HOA costs associated with maintenance of ponds and maintaining open space or amenities. You think you just build a trail in the woods and you set it and forget about it. There's more that goes into there. Even park benches and gazebos, and definitely on the stormwater side. McAdams has benefited from HOAs letting their pods all go to hell. But the reality of it is that, most municipalities now require, annual inspections. And an annual inspection, when left unattended, something's going to come out of it. There's going to be costs associated with it. So, maybe that, I would agree. I would echo Ward on the, I don't think when they buy a house, they realize that the 20-foot tall retaining wall on the back of the site that was put in, is rolled into their number.
Or added 10% to what it would have been if they didn't need that.
Can we explain a little bit more about the retaining walls and the ponds and all that, about why you need those things? Because maybe that's another thing people don't know is like why you need them.
Yeah. So, it just goes back to the site planning. I don't want to say topo is like the number one thing we look at when we first look at a site, but it's up there, right? It's definitely one of our favorite children to figure out, like, what does the topo, look like? So, if you got a piece of paper like here that's rectangular, which doesn't exist anymore, and you got, roads that exist on either side, you're hoping from there to the back, I don't know, it's falling. You could fall 20 feet even and be fine. We're also hoping sewers in the back, and we hope the creek's right there with minimum buffers that we're not even going to crossword. And so we don't even have to permit that. So
and the sewer lines on this side.
As you work from the front to the back, your roads are going to try to follow existing grade as much as you can, not to move as much dirt. And then when you get to the end, it's not flat like this table. It's going to have some slope on it. You end up having to tie your slope back out, right? And so everyone, you don't want to buy a house that you got the backyard, you step out and then you roll all the way down to the creek. You're going to have a flat backyard and then a wall. In some cases, if we can tie out before the stream buffer, we'll do that and not have to put in a retaining wall. But you will see often where you do have decent amount of topo, where you have your foundation of your home, maybe a 4-foot turn down, 3-foot turn down, right? And then from there, backyard, 3-to-1. If you can't tie out, which is just mean that the bulldozer ties out within the limits of clearing, then you're going to put a retaining wall in. So more math. I talked math earlier. So you're looking at $35 a square foot for a retaining wall, all in. So I don't know.
They're not cheap. I know from current projects we're on, they're not
right.
cheap.
So let's say you got 50-foot wide lots, not homes, but 50-foot wide lots. There's 10 of them in a row, and in the backyard. So that's what 10 times 50, 500, and that wall in the back is 10 feet tall. So 500 times 10 times 35. I'm not going to do the math, but that number starts adding up. It's short of 100,000, but you start getting into, upper $50,000 on that just for that segment. Mm-hmm. And if you have a big site, you could have those walls, sort of all over the place. Walls have come a long way on different options we have out there on the retaining walls, and contractors have gotten really good at installing them. I'm going to say walls by nature are meant to fail. That's not what I'm saying, but they provide an opportunity for long-term maintenance that for marketability and profit, people would prefer not to do, right? If you grade out a slope, you're usually good. Retaining walls, if you get water running over the wall, you get water running parallel to it. Those kind of water is terrible for retaining walls. And so you may see walls on, stormwater. That's always a thing to keep an eye on, just because that could be something down the road, unfortunately could fail. Mm-hmm. Their walls are, they're, I feel like we're always playing a balance game between retaining walls, basements, and turn downs, mm-hmm. which are all different ways to catch up grade on sites.
Yep. And so, I like how we were talking about putting all of these things in, right? And the different ways of how they get put in. But when we talked with Bridget and Rob last week, they were talking about their community meetings and their permit approval process and how that goes. And you guys mentioned those earlier for you guys as well. What does that process look like for you two?
Depends on where it is.
Yeah. The good news for us is, sometimes we get asked to attend those meetings that, Rob and Bridget are out. So we don't generally have the people with the pitchforks looking to come get you. We're dealing generally with staff. So, from McAdams standpoint, we get through the rezoning. So Eddie Moore heads up our planning. He often works with Bridget on the rezoning side. And then that comes our way. And so we've done due diligence. We have a site plan. Now we're going to construction drawings. We'll be working, obviously, with the geotech. We're working with Ward and going to construction drawings. So the typical, what that normally looks like for us is we would pull together those drawings, and then we would make a submittal to all the different review agencies. Ward's exactly correct. Depending on where you are, there are plenty of places you have to submit multiple locations. For my 2 cents, I just assume permit every job in the city of Charlotte. I know what I'm getting. I know who to go to. I've known them for 20 years. I don't like all the rules, but I know the rules. And it's very clear on what those are. So, we, depending on how big the site is, I don't know, take a couple months to do the construction drawings, and then we submit to DOT, we submit to whatever county or whatever city we're dealing with. Maybe we have to go to the state. Yeah. So then we'll do that. And that's usually, I don't know, 20 to 30 days or more for their review. We get comments back, we address them, resubmit. We try to do it within 3 submittals to have permits. I think one of the things that we talked earlier about was, some of the added hidden cost in there. I think review timelines with municipalities is a frustration you may hear as you do this policy a lot. Specifically on your permitting side, so if we end up having a creek crossing, so we'll be working with the Ward's team to figure out, is it going to be bottomless? Is it going to be a culvert? If it's a bridge, we really need a good reason why we're doing a bridge most of the time, because they're not cheap.
Yeah.
We're not going to build a bridge for 50 lot subdivision. That's cost prohibitive.
It's got to be big water.
Yeah, it's got to be big water, right? Which would be another conversation on big water. And so for us on that, we generally provide plan and profiles or some exhibits that Ward does his magic. And I'm going to, you run with that.
Well, and just to go back, I'll take off on that in a second, but just to go back to what you were saying at the beginning, I think of your question with regard to the public meetings where people are coming with pitchforks and scythes and other things, and we're wearing the full metal jacket testifying. That largely that's already happened by the time we get to the actual design planning and real permitting, like on my end for wetland impacts. But that is typically the rezoning part of the
So
equation.
the horror stories that Bridget told us.
Exactly.
She's already experienced that.
Right. So you guys don't have to. She's taking the
I
heat.
do that all the time. That's what I was talking about before. That's not really what we're here to talk about. It sounds like y'all touched on that, so I won't go in depth too much about that, other than, like Rob referenced a little while ago, a lot of the time that you're getting a big residential, other residents' opposition to a new development project, oftentimes they've been there for 3 years.
Oh, it's
their neighborhood stubs out where you're connecting it to. And it's I hate to say it, but it's the NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And that is unfortunately all too common experience for that more front end rezoning component. But you get through that.
Sorry to interrupt, but I love we've had several of these that Eddie was working on. It's like, I walk my dog over there. I like to go work out over there. And we're like, so trespassing.
Exactly.
So what you're saying,
exactly.
Like on the record is you're trespassing. Like, okay, got it.
I did a project recently that was adjacent to a private school, and I believe the track coach and 5 or 6 students came up and spoke against this project because that's going to eliminate this area that they've been using for years. That was the property that we're talking about.
Cross-country track.
Exactly. And they had permission from the landowner. They weren't trespassing per se, but that was their opposition to the project, was that is going to eliminate our access to that property. Even though the owner of that property is the proponent for the project. Right. And I won't even get off on that.
There's a lot of stories like that.
Back to the permitting. So we get the impact maps and take those through the permitting process, and often have some initial review and comments as part of those from our perspective, looking at it from regulatory perspective to, like Rob said several times, avoidance and minimization is a huge component. If you can't, particularly for impacts to waters of the United States through the Corps of Engineers, if you can't document that you've avoided and minimized your impacts to the maximum extent practicable, then you're not going to get your permit, or you may be elevated to an individual permit. I won't go all the way back through the different permitting pathways there are. That's a whole other webinar. Podcast, I mean, both. Yeah, exactly. But that's part of what I do, what we do on the front end. And while the design process is ongoing, to kind of look at it in an iterative way and just make sure that the avoidance and minimization is defendable when it gets submitted. Otherwise, that throws a huge wrench in the works.
Do you see a lot of that with the stormwater? Like, is that
a lot of what?
Like trying to minimize.
Well, you can't build stormwater. Speaking of waters of the U.S., you can't build stormwater structures in waters of the U.S. pursuant to nationwide permit condition of nationwide 39 or 29 and 39.
I'm not sure. Is that where you were going with it?
I'm lost.
I mean, a little bit what you were going to was, there was a time many, many, many years ago where, going back 20 some years ago, I felt like you could do inline stormwater with.
Yep, right.
So think about, I'm gonna say, and then he's gonna correct me. So you got like a creek going through your site, not big water, and you need to put a stormwater facility in. So why not utilize the creek, dump the stormwater management halfway in the creek? So now you got a creek to a pond to a creek, and everyone's happy. Well, that's a very dumbed down version, but that's not allowed anymore at all. That's very much a no-no. And that becomes an issue when you think about like existing farm ponds on site. Oftentimes you'll go walk a site and it's beautiful, right? You got gentle pastures and there's this existing farm pond that the farmer put in years ago. And everyone's like, we want to use that as amenity, or we want to use that for a stormwater facility. And the answer is yes, but it's not exactly that simple, right? So it almost many times you end up, sometimes you can, if it's not you can drain it and reclaim some of that property back. Yep. If you did want to use it for stormwater management, you're almost always putting in your own riser structure and rebuilding the dam. So that pond, the way it looks right there, and the pasture and the cows and the farmhouse in the background, is not what it's going to look like at the end. It's not that it's going to be ugly, but it's not going to be the same, because you're going to drain it, rebuild it, put your own dam in. And it's just a whole, I mean, we see that all the time. It's like, what do you do with that beautiful?
That is,
we want to use it as an amenity.
If you get confirmation that it's not a water of the United States, if that's a dammed creek, then you're not building anything on it. You can still drain it, and you might get some of the usable acreage back after it drains, but you can't use that. You can't dam it up. If it's a creek going through there with an adjacent wetland, you can't put your stormwater control measure right on top of that anymore.
Yeah. So that's a good point too. You may get some of the property back, right? Because it could end up being
it takes a while.
Yeah, some sort of wetlands on it. I had one thought while we were talking there. So you've had, land deck on, and then we've had bridging on, and now you got us doing the design and nerding out on the permitting. It's sort of heading towards a conversation about how long all of this is going to take, right? Yeah. So I haven't listened to both other podcasts in full, but at best case, you could be working a piece of property for a year to get it under contract. You could be working a piece of property for a year getting it rezoned, and then you're going to be working a property a year to get all the permits, and then you're going to spend 6 months grading the site, and then you're going to spend 3 months building a house. And so right there is part of the even affordability conversation that we're going to, that we're talking about on this podcast is, over 4 years, even at small inflation or, rents or, mortgages going up, that's a long time. You're buying a house right now, 2026. It could be 2021 when they started looking at the dirt.
Right.
If it was efficient.
If it was efficient. Well, we are efficient. You and I are always efficient.
Yeah.
Come on, right?
And modest.
Absolutely.
Efficiently modest.
That has been a conversation, that we've had with everyone is timeline and how it affects the cost of the house. And that's, kind of a lot what we've talked about. And one of the whole reasons of why we're on this podcast is talk about everything that is included in that cost that is even before you even put any wood up.
And even before you move a spoonful of dirt.
Exactly.
I mean, you talk about the grading, but there's, like you were just saying, there's years and years from the day that you drive by that parcel and wow, that might work, to the day you move the first spoonful of dirt.
Yep. So, ladies and gentlemen, in short, building a house does not happen in a day. It takes quite a bit of time, and we've heard that
not even
3 episodes deep now.
We haven't even built the house yet.
Yeah,
like we're still moving.
You want to go play in the dirt? Get a permit.
But don't treat our soil like dirt.
Yeah, exactly. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on today. It was another great episode, and I know we learned a lot. I did. I always love hearing these conversations, but we loved having you on. And for all of our listeners, make sure to go listen to this podcast wherever you stream. Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or you can go check us out on the website for the Home Builders Association of Greater Charlotte. But for our team here at Framing the Issue, we will catch you on the next one.